Assalamu alaikum, welcome to this video. Today we will look at creating custom connectors in PowerApps. Over here we have a Power App that connects to two APIs. Alright, the first one on top, API to get city time. This gets a time for these cities listed over here. So if I click on get Cape Town time, it's a Cape Town time 1656, Dhaka time 1456, Tokyo time 2356. Okay, and in the API at the bottom, this gets the text from a scanned receipt. So if I get the URL of a receipt that exists online, I paste it in there, and I scan receipt. It returns all the text from this receipt over here. Alright, and that receipt, the text corresponds with the actual receipt that sits online. Okay, so let's unpack this and get into it. So on your Power Apps homepage, there should be a link that takes you to custom connectors. If you don't see this over here, I think you can click on more and it might appear over here. If it does not appear over here, if it does appear over here and you want to have a display, you can pin it. If it does not, you can click on discover all. Or you can actually just scroll down and you should see it over here under data. Mine is pinned already, so see if I unpin it. Disappears. So now it shows over here. Okay, so then we click on custom connectors. And the first one we're going to create is, or look at, is the GeoDB cities time. So this connects to an API, a rapid API. It's from rapidapi.com, right? So to set up this, to connect to this API, I'm going to just edit that. When you create an API connector, you are presented with a page like this. So there's a couple of steps you have to go through in order to create a connector. Of which the first is, I think over here, you just choose an icon for your connector. I'm going to leave it as is. You can add a background color and then you can add a description for the connector. I think there shouldn't be less than 30 characters. And our connection will be HTTPS and the host is this URL over here. If this information over here you should be able to get from the API itself. Let me just see over here. So here you can see the host over there corresponds with this host over here. Okay. Oops, where am I now? And then the base URL is this part over here. Because we're using a GET request, it would be this part over here. But the city ID itself, we're going to add as a parameter to the URL. So you will see in my setup over here, I have the base URL as /v1/geo. I probably could have made it /cities as well, but that part of the URL I've included as a parameter. So if you want to do this or connect to this, create this exact same connector, then just follow what I have over here. /v1/geo. And in security, the authentication type that I have over here is an API key, right? And so over here you can choose the authentication type. I'm using an API key, and the API key will get from the site over here. And then so the API key, this is the label, the name, and where is the parameter located is in the header. So we're passing the API key through the header. Okay. And that is also determined by the the API itself, API provider. After security, we can go to the definition. And over here, we're going to give the connector name and an ID that we will use later on in PowerApps itself, right? To consume the API connection. So I've added the summary, the description, the ID. I've given it the same value, get time. And then we go on to the request. The actual request, you can import it from a sample, and you have the option of choosing of these API connections. So I'm using this one that I'm consuming is consumed using a GET request, right? And I can see over here, I'm using GET over there. And we can actually just quickly test the API on the site itself. So if you click on test endpoint over here, and I go to the site wikidata.org, and I search for a city ID, I paste that over here, test endpoint, and then they ask get the time for Tokyo over there. And if I go to my app, we can do the exact same test. The time should be 6 minutes past 12 after midnight, and that is the exact same time I've received over here. So moving on, this is a GET request, right? And the URL would be, so what I currently have over here is this is my URL over here. Okay, and just to go through this, this part is the URL over here, and then city ID, this we're passing as a parameter. So this we're gonna get from PowerApps, okay, and then / time. That's the endpoint. Okay, so that would be, if you click on import from sample, you click on get, and then you would add that URL over here. And then the headers, in the header, the only thing we're passing is the API key, and that would be something. Sorry, my bad. The city we're passing in the URL as a parameter, and then the API key we're passing as a header. Okay, so importing from sample, I would choose get, paste that over there. That will be the URL, including city ID as a URL parameter, and then the API key would be something like what I have over there, x rapid. Sorry, x rapid API key. Okay. Report. So yeah, that made no change, but basically if you were starting from scratch, this is what would appear after you've done that. And then the response, again, we can just come back to the API, copy the sample response over here, and then paste that over here. Oops. The default response. We have no headers in the response, is only the body. Import, and then that's imported over here. And if you click on default, this will show you what's has been imported. Okay, moving on. Of the definition, IAN plugin, yeah, you can ignore the step. Code for the simple API, we don't need any of that. And then you can also test it over here, alright? And then before you can actually test it, you have to now save it and update it, whatever's, yeah, you have to do there. And then you'd have to go to connections and then actually create a connection which you can test. So over here, we're creating a custom connector. Alright, we're creating it, but to actually make use of it, we have to establish a connection, and that we do over here under connections. These are all my connections that I currently have. I've created one for city time. So if I hadn't one, I would just click on new connection. Here's my custom connection. I click on there, and then I'm able to come back to my custom connector and test it. Okay. So now if I were to go back to, it's a tedious step. When you create a connector, you have to go out of the custom connector, establish a connection, come back to your custom connector, and then test it. Okay. So I would go over here, and then if I would want to test, I go to test, right? And then city ID, I have one listed there already, and then my API key, and then there is the connection that I've created. I've created mine a while back. So now if I click on test, and this is I think this is for, let's see what the time is, I'll be able to tell you. So there's a data to return 1713, yeah, that is the Cape Town city ID. Okay, so that is creating the connector, the custom connector, establishing a connector. Now we want to consume it in PowerApps. So if I go back to PowerApps over here, I have it working already over here. But basically, what you'd have to do over here to consume the connector is I've inserted a button, and on select of the button, it consumes a connector. Alright, the connection. But the first thing I have to do is add a connection over here, or add a data connection over here. So we would create a new connection. There's the connection that we have. So I would click on there, and then you just follow the steps and it will appear over here, right? So now we have this connection over here. Then if you want to actually consume it now, I have this button over here, and on select of this button, what I'm doing is I'm setting a variable called Cape Town time variable, and then set it to this connection, and I'm getting the time for that city ID. Remember, we're passing the city ID as a parameter in the URL. If I go back over here, go back to, I think it was definition. Remember over here, there's a parameter. So here we're passing that parameter, that city ID parameter over here. So I have to click on that. It will update the time to the current time. And here I'm just doing that basically for each of these buttons. I mean, obviously you can probably create a field called city ID, and then have a button get time for that specific for that city ID, and then give you the time. But yeah, that's the setup that I have over here. And yeah, if you have any questions on that basic API connection, leave a comment. Okay. So now moving on to T3C text, right? This is a bit more complicated. Okay. The API that we're using over here is a API provided by OCR Space. And on the website, you can get a free API key when you sign up. Alright, you can get a free API key, but these are the options that I have over here. So I'm just using a free API key. Okay. And then, yeah, we're going to test it with that. Okay, so when I was busy setting this up, I tried to set this create this custom connector in the same way that I created this city time connector as well. And what I noticed was that the type of connection, right, or the type of data that's being passed for this one over here is JSON, whereas with the other one, I think this is how I describe it, as form data. Okay, so at least I was unable to go through the wizard over here to create this custom connectors. These steps over here, I was unable to do that. What I discovered was that, let me go back to custom connectors. Let me exit this one. So this is the one that I've created. Remember with the first one, basically you can go through these steps over here to create the connection. Just to cut a long story short, here's an option here in the wizard called Swagger Editor, right? Okay. So basically I directly updated or added the configuration for the connection over here. Okay. This over here, the Swagger text, is in a format called YAML. Alright. So we're not gonna cover YAML syntax in this tutorial. But basically, if you want, I can drop this a sample in in the description, and I'll add a link to this file which you can use for your consumption and to play around with. But basically, you prepare this file, right? You come to your Swagger editor, you paste this in here, and you update connector or create connector. The one thing to remember is that when you're updating the Swagger editor directly, and this is another issue that I encountered, every time you do an update, it might not reflect in your PowerApps connector or the actual connection that you've established. And that is because I think what I discovered that if you change the version number every time you update the connector, then that should resolve the update on the PowerApp side. It's almost like PowerApps is looking to see if there's any version change. If there's any version change in the custom connector, then it will reload the connection or refresh the connection. Okay. So basically, if we just quickly run through the Swagger text over here, let me just paste this in Notepad. I think it makes it easier. So if you open up this up in Notepad and go to YAML, okay. So over here, we first have what the Swagger and the version of Swagger that you're using. And you have 2.0. Info, I think that is the version of the connection. As I explained, every time you do an update the connector, trying to or you must update the version over here. Okay. Title, that's the title of the connection. And with this API, you can either pass the image details or the receipt, in this case the receipt details, as a URL. So you can put in the URL to a receipt that exists online, or you can upload a file, or you can actually pass the base64 for coding as well. And then for the specific example, we're using the host, which is API ocr.space. It's a base path, consumes multi-part form data. Alright, so you can see it says multi-part form data. Let me just check if I had to go back and click on custom connectors. Now I have to edit that. So even this one over here, if I click on Swagger, I'll be able to view the Swagger file. So you'll see here consumes, it's just an array, I think, whereas over here you specify multi-part form data. Okay, so yeah, that is the reason why I found it difficult or hard to create this connection, this custom connection, using the wizard. Okay, consumes produces application.json, whereas, so this is also a space one, whereas this one produces an array, it doesn't specify. Okay, and then the pass image, that is the endpoint. And then so here for each parameter that is passed, you will see that it has a name. This is the API key that we're passing, and we're passing it in the header, and is it required, yes or no. That means is it Does it have to have a value and the type a string? Let's just quickly go through. So this is this is a required parameter to connect to the API. Although I've not listed as required over here, it should actually be required. And then another parameter that we need, I found useful exactly for this type of OCR connection, is to, here's a parameter called isTable. So this returns the text in a table format, making it easy for you to actually consume it. So isTable, default value, sorry, the default value I've set to true. Okay, and then you'll see as a parameter called base64 image as well. If you were going to pass the image as base64, and then you would be able to add that super long string over here as a parameter. But what we're doing is we're adding a URL. So somewhere in here there should be a URL. Let's see, home data also. Oh yeah, the other one is OCR engine for receipts. If you use the engine 2, it gives you a better result. I'm just looking for the URL. Okay, here we have it. URL. Yeah, URL at form data full string null. Okay. As you can see here, I'm able to pass both URL and base64. I haven't tested to see what happens if you, for example, populate the URL, the base64 code, or even a file upload. What does the API look at first? I think I would look at the first parameter. I haven't tested to see what happens if you populate all of those, but yeah, you can try and let us know in the comments what happens if you try and use all of those types. Okay, so that is a Swagger file. Okay, I'll try and put a link to this in the video. So then again, we'll create the connector, establish a connection. And also when you're in the Swagger mode, right, when you're viewing a Swagger editor, you can test your connections over here. For example, I would click on post and this would pop up over here. And then I click on try it out, and I can try out the connection. So I click on API key, I'll set my API key over there. And here you can see I can either upload a file or add a URL. And these are all my parameters that are being used. And this corresponds with what is required here on the OCR Space website. So yeah, there's basically two type of connections over here: a get, a request, or a post. I'm using the post. Okay, and we go to post, we'll tell you all the post parameters over here. Okay, it's actually a nice API to use. So now again on the PowerApps side, utilizing this or consuming this API, I've added a button here, right? So on select of this button, we're creating a variable. Oh yeah, I'm assuming that you by now know how to actually connect to the connection from within Power Apps. So we're creating a variable, setting it to OCR space, and because we're passing parameters, this is the format that we must use. Open the brackets and then the curly braces where you actually pass your parameters, right? So because we're passing it as key value pairs, I don't think it actually matters the order that you pass the parameters in. So you have the URL, and this is the URL to an actual receipt that sits on the web, which is, sorry, that would be this one over here. Okay, is overlay required? False. True. Engine using is 2 and stable is 0. Okay, so now remember this is the URL to a receipt that sits online. So again, we click on scan receipt. It's connecting to that API. Oh, the other thing as well, it's connecting or getting a text. I think when you establish a connection initially, it will ask you to insert the API. So when you establishing a connection, just make sure you insert, or you'll be forced to actually add your API. So let's look at what was returned. Okay, if I click on variables over here, here's all my global variables. So you'll see what was returned for these requests over here. For example, it's just returned the time for that city. But you'll see what is returned here for the OCR connection is a bit more complicated. It returns a record, but within that record, we have a table called parser results. And within this table, we have another table that we want to get to, which is, you can either consume all the text over here in this column called parse text, but I like to go to consume the actual table over here, text overlay table. And within the text overlay table, you have different lines, right? And this is where we get this over here. So the way I'm displaying it over here is in a gallery. I'm using this to get all the lines from the parse results. Okay, getting all the lines over here, and then the title for each item, we click on text, would be line text. Okay, so just to see what your response looks like, always know that you can visit it as a variable. You can go to the actual response and then see what's inside there. So inside, I can say there's only one record that's returned, but within that record there's a table for parse results. Within parse results, text overlay, a table exists for that. And within that, there's a table for lines. And then there's another table over here, which gives you, I think, the positioning or the width, sorry, for each of those lines, the dimensions for each of those lines. But just again, I think because this was useful to me, I'll mention it over here again. So here we're getting the first parse result, or the first overlay from the parse results. Remember, this is a table over here, and we're getting the lines from there, which is also the table. Right, so if you see, if I click on lines over there, it will say it returns a table, and within a gallery you want to return a table. Right, you can't return a single record. You don't actually need a gallery to display it. So, and then over here, the line text column for each item is displayed over here. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Thank you very much. Alaikum salam.